Alright, so I wanted to make a video today, and in this video, I was going to try to lay out a more clear understanding and just kind of give some general thoughts about fascism. Now, as someone on the far right, and pretty much everyone on the far right knows this, if you're on the far right, you will pretty much relentlessly be called a fascist. Now, of course, the left uses this term as liberally as possible, and it's kind of similar to the way that the right has started to use the term communist and socialist very liberally. If you spend any time in those circles, you'll know that the normal conservatives, the Fox News listeners, and those types of people, basically incessantly will call anyone, even neoliberals or center leftist, people like that, people like Obama, Hillary Clinton, they'll call them communists and socialists. But it's not entirely true. Now, Obama and Clinton and the mainstream Democrats and the far-left Democrats, for that matter, yes, they are cultural Marxists to a degree in nature. They do advocate things such as homosexuality, racial equality, mass immigration. Basically, they've adopted all the tactics that the communists invented after they were defeated in the ballot booth in Europe. For those of you that don't know, cultural Marxism is essentially a theory that was created by the Frankfurt School Jews, and it was a strategy and a theory that they were trying to use because they realized that most Western countries weren't going to vote in communism. The capitalist economies were producing too much. The time had passed for communism to be viable. So they came up with this strategy where they would try to subvert the morals, and they would subvert the demographics of a country, so that way they could try to implement their communist plots. So yeah, the Democrats fall in line with that pretty well. Most of them could quite adequately be considered cultural Marxists. However, they're not economic Marxists. And they might be in theory, they might be in their heads. We don't really know, but their official positions have always been neoliberal, neo-Keynesian. They've always been pro-Federal Reserve, pro-state intervention, pro-spending during recession, but letting it go during bad time, or letting it go during prosperous times, and letting the market regulate itself. But still, you'll see these people on the right, and let's be honest, not everyone on the right is very intelligent, just like not everyone on the left. There's quite a few dumb people on both sides. Most people that talk about politics don't actually know anything about it, and they're just spouting off random stuff that they think sounds good, and they're regurgitating stuff from celebrities and people that they think have more sway and knowledge than them. So, people on the right have been doing that since at least the Red Scare in the 60s, 50s or so. But it's ramped up recently again, it seems. Seems in the post-Obama election era, they've been doing it a lot more than they did in, say, the 1990s or the early 2000s. So it was kind of spiking in the 50s and 60s with the Red Scare, and to the 70s, the 80s, and in the 90s and 2000s it seemed to decline, but then now it's spiking back up, and it's still continuing to this day. If Hillary would have gotten in, I have no doubt in my mind that she would widely be called a communist by all the Fox News people and all the Donald posters, who aren't, quite frankly, very intelligent. But this trend of calling everyone a fascist has been something that the left has done much before. You can go back and find pictures from the 1915s, 1920s of all over the world, in Russia, in Germany, in France, in the UK, in the US, basically anywhere where these communist agitators were. And remember, back then, before cultural Marxism was created by the Frankfurt Jews, communism was an economic idea. More so, it wasn't basically what it was the gains that had came from the technological advancements in the Industrial Revolution had so greatly affected the upper class and brought them to basically a level unimaginable of living standards, but the lower classes weren't seeing the gains as quickly in some rural areas, weren't quite as urbanized, or as they didn't have as good of technology, I should say. So these people in these rural areas and working the mines and stuff, they weren't feeling the benefit. The benefit of capitalism lagged behind quite a bit, simply because that's the way standards of living work. So that's why you had such a huge communist movement at the time. It was natural to rebel against capitalism in a time when, quite frankly, yes, capitalism was good. It was way better than what we had previously, but the standards of living were not quite rising as quickly for everyone. So that's why communism was so popular, and it was a blue-collar idea. You can go back and look at people like the Appalachian communist, and these were people that were basically being exploited by northern imperials and the U.S. government, creating the situation for which that exploitation could happen. And they're to get it down in those mines, getting black lungs, having rocks fall on their heads. So they turn to communism because they're badass men, revolutionaries. They want to stick it to the man, raise hell. So they did that. Same thing in Russia. The Russian communist wasn't a cultural Marxist. He wasn't a social justice warrior. He's a badass, burly dude sitting out there with a fucking pickaxe and a sickle and hammer, fucking bashing people, fucking arguing, raising hell. That's what the old communist prototype used to be. It was actually something to be kind of proud of. Now, obviously, we know that it's not a good system. It's a terrible system. But at the time, you can see why they did it, and it's actually respectable in a weird sort of way. And they could, and at the time, it sounded like a decent theory to just the normal person. I mean, without the empirical evidence, it's hard to make a concrete argument just on logic alone. So that's why it took the failures for people to realize how bad it was. So that's basically why economic Marxism has been dead for 100 years. One, because the conditions of capitalism have progressed so quickly that the standards of living have gone up for everyone, and we've seen the empirical failures of communism from people that had the best intentions. And yeah, they were getting subverted by the Jewish leaders in most cases, but that's not really wholly relevant to the situation at hand. So anyway, yeah, you go back to the 1915s and the 1920s, you have these badass, burly men. You have these badass, burly communist men out there with their sickles and hammers, brawling the capitalist. And then, out of nowhere, these fascists come in. And these National Socialists. And now these guys are something different because they're saying, well, socialism and capitalism, or not socialism, communism and capitalism are both Enlightenment ideas. They both respond by the Enlightenment. We need something. We need a third way system, something that can work for everyone and doesn't focus and isn't based on materialist interests. So, some of them use the term. Some of them were using the term socialist at the time, and some of them were using the term third way and there's a bunch of different terms that they're using. But so now you have these three factions, these three economic factions on the scene. And obviously the fascists aren't really an economic faction. They're a cultural faction that applies that cultural narrative to the economy. They're trying to minimize degeneracy and exploitation, so they come up with a system that rejects the materialist worldview that the capitalist of the day and the communist of the day were embroiled in. So now you have these legitimate fascists with Mussolini and all of those, and Hitler. Not Hitler at the time, but he would come later. But you have the NSDAP, and you have it in Spain rising up, and there's a bunch of these different movements, these fascists, these third way, these culturally somewhat conservative, although I'll touch on that later, movements rising up, these nationalist movements rising up to fight the two materialist systems. So these were the legitimate fascists, and the communists were right to call them fascists because that's what they identified with. Well, pretty much right after that is when the communists started calling everyone who wasn't a communist a fascist. So the perversion of the word fascism is back. It has gone right back to the beginning of fascism, practically. You have people holding up signs at anti-capitalist rallies, protesting the global elites and the bankers and stuff like that, saying death to fascists, people, seize the means of production, bash the fash, whatever. So these people, the left has been conflating these terms by and large for almost 100 years now. So the right now deflating terms of the left, it can be understood as a natural backlash, a good linguistic strategy to trying to fight them. Okay, so now that we've laid out the perversion of the word fascist, what actually is fascism? Well, the way I've always viewed it, and this is the way that I've heard a lot of people describe it, a lot of self-identified fascists describe it. The three major components, the three necessary components, are basically third-way economics, which includes stuff like National Socialism, distributism, there's many more systems. I'm kind of drawing a blank at this particular moment, but Strasserism, whatever, there's tons of them that you could name. And all these systems are systems that seek to find a way between capitalism and socialism. Now, something like social democracy, no, it's not really a fascist type system, because in social democracy, social democracy, for those that don't know, is essentially a scheme that capitalists invented so that they could have their capitalist system, their free markets, their what some would view as exploitation, and they could have that while keeping the masses from revolting and going with a third way or a second way economic system. So something like social democracy is not a fascist system, but something like distributism, which is, for those who don't know, that's the theory that private property is good. It's the foundation of society, but the problem with it is that not enough people own it. So if we distribute some of this private property ownership, and at the time land was the big thing, 40 acres and a meal and all that, distribute that to more people can own their own land and produce for themselves, and then it'll reduce the materialistic side of capitalism. The problem with this, of course, is that it ignores the division of labor. But this isn't a video dissecting the economic stability of fascism, so I'll just leave it at that for now. Then you have Strasserism, which it's still something that you'll hear about a lot if you're in fascist communities, but I guess it could kind of be viewed as almost second way. It's almost completely socialist, it's kind of like National Bolshevikim, which is what Dugin espouses. Obviously, it's not just for Russia, but so that's the difference, the main difference from what I understand. But there's similar types of economic systems. And then you have National Socialism, which is what Hitler was espousing, and it's been really popular in a lot of in a lot of African and a lot of Middle Eastern countries. And then you have Mussolini's system of corporatism, which is the merger of state and corporation. And corporatism is not the same as what we see today, in countries like the US, which is really a corporatocracy. The difference between corporatism and a corporatocracy is that corporatism is when the state gets hold of a corporation and they use it to employ people, and they nationalize industry, and they basically try to use it, they centrally plan it to try to benefit the people, supposedly, and the state. But corporatocracy is just where a corporation in a capitalist framework will bribe the government to pass regulations to stifle competition. So if you're a capitalist, if you're either first way economics, which is capitalism, or you're a socialist, a complete socialist, you can't be a fascist. So there's this canard that happens a lot. And the canard is, the Soviet Union was just red fascism. It was just authoritarian communist fascism. Well, no. You can't have a communist country or a society that's trying to become an internationalist communist country, expanding its empire, trying to go about global revolution, perpetual revolution. That society cannot be fascist. Now, it may not be full socialist utopia, anarchist utopia, communist utopia, whatever, but it's certainly not a fascist system. It's just a failed communist state. And there's also this new trend of, we're fasci goys, and fasci goy, whatever. And this is something that you see a lot in alt-right circles. But the problem with this fasci goys meme is that most of the people, maybe 70% of the people that espouse it, are actually just these helicopter pilot type libertarians that want a libertarian economy, a capitalist economy, a materialist economy, but they also want to kill leftists or stop degeneracy or have borders. So those people also aren't fasci goys. And by the way, I'm not a fasci goy either. Now, I do denounce the materialism of capitalism, and I seek to find ways to fix it, which I'll get to in a later video. But I'm not third way. I basically believe in privatize everything, but allow the states to suppress parasitism and degeneracy, which is distinctly different from the fascist worldview. So now we have the fascist worldview of the economy, against materialism, third way. Okay, the next element is nationalism. Now, nationalism can take a lot of forms, of course. Nationalism can be imperialist nationalism, and that would be something like the European countries of the 20th century. They were nationalists, they were putting their citizens first, but they also sought to take over other land and use that to benefit them. You can be isolationist and nationalist, where you just do your own thing, want to be left alone, you won't mess with anyone else, you'll have peace and all that, but you just want sovereignty for your group. And then there's civic nationalism, which isn't ethnic nationalism like the first two, which I was implying. Civic nationalism is just the belief that it's tied in heavily with nativism, the view that the people born in the country, the citizens of the country, the state has a duty to serve those people, and the state's duty to serve those people should come over the duty to serve the world. You can't be a fascist if you're an internationalist, even if you somehow believed in a corporatist economy or whatever, but a Strasserist economy, but you thought that you weren't a nationalist, even if a civic nationalist, then you would not be a fascist. Okay? So, the next one that's important is authoritarianism. This is the third plank that I view as essential. If you want stuff like lax social policies, gay marriage allowed, miscegenation allowed, free abortion, free gun ownership, no surveillance, no draft. There's a myriad of things, but we all know what authoritarian versus libertarian is. If you fall heavily to the libertarian side on those social issues, I don't think you can be a fascist. I don't know exactly what you would be. You would be, I guess, some kind of weird communist. You would be some kind of just weird third way guy who also has degenerate social views. I've never actually seen this combination. Usually what happens, it's either where people fail to be fascist is they fail to be fascist on the nationalist place or the third way economics place. I've never seen someone that's third way economics and nationalist but has a libertarian social policy. I don't think it's a thing. At least if it is, I've never seen it, and it makes no sense why someone would be that. So yeah, I'd say I'm quite authoritarian in my social policy, but there's a difference between fascist authoritarianism and maybe the type of authoritarianism that I have. Now, fascism is often characterized as being that the individual is subordinate to the state. The job of the individual is to serve the state. But that's actually not correct. That's totalitarianism, largely. That's what we would call totalitarianism. So I don't think... But what fascism actually is it's that all the individuals must contribute to the collective good, and the state serves to, in return, serve the collective. So, yeah, there would be individuals left in the dust. It's not an individualist thing, but it's also not this scary totalitarian, oh, you all must sacrifice everything for the name of this social construct of the state. That's not what it is. That's a mischaracterization of it by people that seek to demonize fascism. But what I was saying about the social policy, there is a difference between a fascist social policy and my reactionary authoritarian social policy. Now, I'm not a Avolian type traditionalist, but I am a radical traditionalist in a way, and I'm a Catholic reactionary. So, a traditionalist Catholic, I guess you could say. A neo-reactionary, also identify with that movement. But my views are somewhat different than that of the fascist. Because the fascist, while we share a lot of common ground on our social views, there's no doubt about that, the fascist also seeks to fuse He also seeks to fuse the technological state, and he seeks to fuse the technological state with social reaction. So, a lot of fascists were against religion, for example. Hitler was definitely against it. Mussolini, maybe even more so. And basically the only reason either of them tolerated it is because they were subordinated to the interest of the people, and if they just went completely rogue and started destroying the churches, they would likely have been overthrown. Now, fascism, believe it or not, is a sort of progressivism. Now, I know that might be rather triggering to the people on here, or to some people, but it's the truth. The type of reactionary views that me and many others hold are not diametrically opposed, but they are opposed to the views of fascists. I seek to bring back the type of kingdom, the monarchy system, and the clan system and the hierarchy that came with that. Fascism, while not expressly, does somewhat eliminate hierarchy. Now, also what fascism does is it seeks to heavily centralize things. Compared to something like me, where I'm something of a compared to me, I should say, and many others like me, where I'm something of a communitarian. The community on the local scale is what matters the most, not the overarching state and what everyone in it does. So, for instance, if there's a kingdom, we say we have the Prussian kingdom or whatever, and you have German people, you have French people, and you have Polish people all living under this because they've conquered people. Well, to me, that doesn't particularly matter. What matters is that the main people of the state still have control over it, and that the Prussian kingdom is still subordinated to the interests of the people, to the German people instead of the Polish people. And it doesn't particularly matter if they're all under one state. What matters is that they live separately, for one, and that they can make decisions locally. Now, for many of you don't know this probably, but Italy, before fascism came, was quite ununified, honestly. One of Italy's first few governments was the Mussolini fascist government. Now, ever since the fall of the Roman Empire, practically, for hundreds of years, the Italians had been living in Italy wasn't unified, basically. They had been living in these city-states and these different places where they had communitarian rule. Now, I'm quite fond of that, and no doubt, when fascism came, it was diametrically opposed to the way that they had been living for hundreds of years. So one thing that fascists like to say is that they're maintaining the natural order. But in fact, fascism isn't the natural order. It's subverting the natural order with its progressive roots. And in that natural order is localism, a type of communitarian traditionalism, and clanism. So it's subverting those. And there's no doubt that subverting it to bring a more conservative agenda is good, compared to the alternatives, that is. Compared to socialism, full socialism and full communism, and even just complete capitalism. Yes, it's better to subvert them with this type of progressive, third way, but still nationalist system. It is better. But I still stand opposed to that type of centralization of power as a traditionalist and as a radical traditionalist. Now, there's a lot more aspects of fascism that we could get into. Like, you often hear people call Democrats fascist too. There's basically, colloquially, fascism has pretty much came to mean anyone who attends to oppose any agenda on anyone. You want net neutrality, you're a fascist. You want to ban gay marriage, you're a fascist. You want a welfare you want to have a welfare system, you're a fascist. And once again, this isn't new. It's just the tactic of the day. You want to start a war, you want to go into the Vietnam War, you're a fascist. There's nothing surprising about this. It's the same tactics like I mentioned earlier. And I could get into this more, but there's no point of it because it's too stupid to take seriously. No one would actually, no scholar, no one serious would think that that's what fascism means. Fascism is a legitimate political movement, or it was a legitimate political movement. It's been delegitimized pretty much now, right or wrong. But it was a legitimate ideological progressive movement of the 20th century, and fascism was always, the way I like to look at it is it was nature's violent reaction to a certain set of circumstances in 20th century Europe. It was a violent reaction to the communist and capitalist fighting, along with the social degeneracy that the Jews were bringing in the Weimar Republic and things like that. That's what fascism is. Fascism is not just a buzzword that can be thrown around. It's not just an insult. Fascism is a legitimate political ideology, and it should be debated like any other because it does have its merits to it. And if you're on the right, if you're a libertarian or a conservative, a normie watching this, and you're one of these people that calls everyone a fascist, I would think twice about that, lest the political discourse in intellectual circles is going to decline even further than it already has. And thanks for watching, and let me know what you think in the comments. If I got anything wrong in this video, just tell me, and maybe you can come on and debate me about it or have a conversation with me about it. And yeah, have a good day, everyone.